So my name is Charles Rotramel. I am the CEO of a nonprofit in Houston called Houston Revision, and we work with kids on the edge. And so what I'm going to do this morning, very briefly, is sort of take you through why this problem matters, why this issue of school discipline is so significant in our community. School discipline creates the juvenile justice system. The majority of kids who enter the juvenile justice system enter that because of the school discipline system. As evidence of that, the number of kids who are in the Harris County Juvenile Detention Center today is at its lowest point in the last 12 years. And that is actually because the Harris County District Attorney's Office has made a conscious effort not to accept referrals from school district police officers. And so our work in revision is largely with kids in the juvenile justice system. We got interested in this issue of school discipline because that's the front door of the juvenile justice system. It has not always been this way. These issues began in the mid-90s, 1994, with the introduction of zero tolerance policies. In fact, federal funding for schools was tied to zero tolerance policies during that period of time. So zero tolerance policies are a philosophy or policy that mandates the application of predetermined consequences. That's the key. So if you commit a certain offense in a certain sense, actually these are just behaviors. These are often fighting in school, talking back to the teacher, persistent misbehavior, then you receive a predetermined consequence. And that's the core of these zero tolerance policies. So they're actually part of the broken windows theory of crime, which has been a lot discussed in the media. And really it assumes that the removal of disruptive students deters others from similar conduct while enhancing the classroom. And this is codified in student codes of conduct, which were often written boilerplate in the mid-90s. And so I always like to show an example of a code of conduct that is not from either of the school districts represented here today, but it is a Houston area school district. So here's an example of a particularly heinous student code of conduct. So this says no student shall willfully engage in disruptive activity, and then it goes on to define that conduct as including, but is not limited to, emission of any means of noise of any intensity that prevents or hinders classroom instruction. Think about how broad that is. So we can remove a student from the classroom for the emission of any means of noise. If you've ever been around teenagers, you know that a lot of kids get caught up in this sort of policy. So these result in court referrals. It's not just like when I went to school or when many of us went to school where if you got in trouble you would go to the office. That is not what happens. A lot of times you are immediately suspended from school and then that generates a court referral. You end up in juvenile court. This also is tied to the increase in school police on school campuses. And there are tremendous ethnic disparities in these suspensions and removals from school, which then drive the dropout rate. It also drives juvenile crime to increase. These numbers are also largely related to the presence of alternative education programs. Every school district in the state of Texas is mandated to have a district alternative education program, a DAEP. Many of these campuses, well, they look like this, right? So this is not the way we would want a school to look if we are trying to build school culture, if we are trying to build school belongingness. These actually fight directly against that. You are only in this school because you are in trouble. You are being punished. So you automatically do not want to go to school. The other thing that happens is you often don't get your work from your regular teachers when you're in this school, so you fall behind. And if you're mandated to be there for 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, you can imagine how far behind a student might fall. This then is the school to prison pipeline. You've heard this language, that's what we're talking about. The school to prison pipeline is exactly this set of circumstances. To put some numbers on it, from a couple of years ago, There are 1.1 million students in Region 4. That's the 10-county region that includes Harris County that the Texas Education Agency designates. A couple of years ago, there were 478,000 discipline records. A discipline record, again, is not being sent to the office. A discipline record is a suspension or a removal to a district alternative education program. And so that's almost half the kids, right? So it's a massive number, and the minority overrepresentation cannot be understated. 19% of students in Region 4 are African American, 43% of discretionary removals are African American, 46% of students suspended more than once are African American. An African American male in Harris County, Texas is 9 times more likely to be suspended than an Anglo male. That's the reality of it. The other issue that we have in Texas is there are 2 types of removals. So there are discretionary removals, which are at the discretion of the school, and then there are those mandatory removals. A mandatory removal is a violation of law. I think we would all agree that if you violate the law, you need to go off the school campus. But unfortunately, in Harris County, only 2.8% of removals are for mandatory reasons. The rest of them, 97%, are discretionary. So we are kicking so many kids out, hundreds of thousands of kids. The very best resource I can recommend on this topic is from the Breaking School Rules report, which is done by the Justice Center of the Council of State Governments. I would strongly recommend this research. It's a Texas study, and it really goes into all the details. And so I'll tell you about our school-based program for revision. We decided, because of this problem, we saw all of our kids entering the juvenile justice system after being suspended and removed from school, falling behind. The average revision kid in the juvenile justice system is 3.5 years below grade level on the day that we meet them. So we decided to start a school-based program in Spring Branch ISD. We are now doing that in Houston ISD. And this school-based program, we go to the principal and we say, give us your worst students. Give us the students that have the most discipline records. Then we assign a mentor to those students. We put them into restorative justice circles. We also provide some academic supports, and we engage in community activities with them. We do soccer, we do baseball, we do all kinds of activities. So we've seen an 18% increase in the attendance of those students. We've seen 67% reduction in discipline records, and 63 of 65 of those students who are still in school are still on track to graduate. We actually had 14 of them graduate this past year. These are the worst kids in school. I'll give you one last example. I know my time is up, but I'll give you one example. We received a referral from the principal of Northbrook Middle School. We asked for 10 students. She gave us 11. She said, Chris, you got to do something with Chris. Chris is the worst student in school. We don't know what to do with him. He's really smart, but we don't know what to do with him. We assigned a mentor and engaged all of these activities with him starting in 8th grade. Chris today is attending Blinn College. He was at the very top of the Dean's Honor Roll at Blinn College in December. He went from being the worst student in middle school to being the very best student in college, literally. That's what these kids are capable of. We've got to end the practices that lead to these problems.